Hi, thank you for joining me. Today I'm doing a journal page. I'm starting by painting my page with speckled egg, and I'm using this gorgeous fat brush. It's a number 50 brush, and of course I've just painted a plain background, so nothing exciting. So now I'm using this white distress paint, and I'm going to create clouds using a paper towel, and I'm just going to dab. I'm going to crumple up the paper towel and then just dab it in and create clouds. And I'm going to concentrate some extra white on the very top of each sort of little cloud that I've created, and then I'll add a couple of extra little bits and pieces. Because this is acrylic, it dries really fast, and it's also waterproof. So this is Broken China, Distress Oxide, and Stormy Sky, and Faded Jeans. So I'm going to be using these colors to create an ombre effect in the lower half of these two pages, starting with the Broken China. And I'm just using a speedball brayer, and I'm just going to brayer the lines across, and I'm not fussing too much. I'm not trying to create a smoothness with the brayer. And then the Stormy Sky, just same kind of thing, just adding some streaks across the page, and you'll see in a minute how I get them to actually ombre. Just getting as much as I can off the brayer. Make sure if you are brayering color that you do clean your brayer between, and make sure you put it onto your pad dry, because these oxides do cross-contaminate, and of course water will also contaminate your pad because it will oxidize your ink. So it's a blended ink of ink and pigment and dye. And then I take this baby wipe that I've kind of let dry for a while, so it's just slightly damp, and I'm just going to use that to move the color around. So you can't really see the ombre effect just yet until I start adding the green. So this is peeled paint, also oxide. All the inks I'm using today, except for the couple of times I use VersaFine, they're all the oxide inks. So you can see once I start to add the green how you can start to see that ombre effect, and the green really makes that soft blue color really pop. And this is Mowed Lawn. It's a very bright green, and as soon as I add this to the page, it really does make that color pop beautifully. It literally is the color of Mowed Lawn. These are all Tim Holtz colors, and I don't know about anybody else, but I've started to see everything in nature and everything around me in Tim Holtz terms. So Mowed Lawn. So again, just putting it on with a brayer and then just blending it in very smoothly in very little amount. I don't want it to look like it's this perfect, almost like machine made blend. That's why I put it on with the brayer, because it automatically creates some depth and levels to your color. Then I'm using this French script stamp. It's by Penny Black. If you don't have a script stamp, really you should get one, because it's the stamp that I've honestly used the most. So I'm back to using the Mowed Lawn. I'm going to try and keep my colors within a certain spectrum, and I'm just putting a little bit in the middle of the stamp, and then I'm just lightly tapping it down, and doing the same with the peeled paint. And because they're oxides, they are kind of chalky, and so they're not very bold stamps. Then I decided to go a little stronger with this forest moss, especially when I'm stamping onto the green. I just wanted a little bit, something with a little bit more pop, but it's still very subtle. It's just that I could then see it on top of the green. And I just repeat the process with the 3 shades of blue. And I'm being very light with my touch. I'm not trying to make a very purposeful stamp, to quote Tim Holtz. I'm not stamping with purpose, I'm stamping very lightly. It is still with purpose, but the purpose being to keep it very light-handed. So I'm just demonstrating there that I'm just lightly tapping in a couple of spots, and very hard to see, very subtle, but you'll see it better in the still photos. So this is vintage photo, and I almost always use a vintage photo somewhere, and I'm keeping this brown to more the outside just because I'm going to have some brown edging, And I just put some on my mat, and I've sprayed some water on it, and I'm just using a fan brush to create some little speckles on my speckled egg background. It's the purpose of it all is just tie everything together color wise and, you know, visually as well. So I've got these little scalloped edged dies, but they don't cut out frames. It's a solid scallop square. So I'm going to use those little squares, those little purple lilac squares you can see in the background. Those are dies too, and I'm going to use them on the inside so I can create actual frames. And I've got two different sizes. I'm going to be cutting both of them. I'm going to cut them out of like a chocolate brown, like a beautiful rich brown cardstock. And that's for the right hand side. And then I wanted a rectangular one for the left hand side. And oh yeah, those square frames are honestly so handy. I've used them for so many different things so often, it's crazy. I love them, just like a little nesting set. So then I have a spellbinder set that I'm going to use later on, but I wasn't sure what I was going to be using at this point in time, so I cut my birds first. That's a Sizzix set, Tim Holtz, and this is a 3-layered little bird. So it has like the background, and then it has like a middle layer, and then it has a wing. And I cut them out of watercolor paper, which I really like because it's 140-pound stock that I'm using, and it's a really nice weight, and it's substantial die, and it takes color very well. So here's the spellbinder rectangular die, and it's exactly matched with the scalloping. The only thing is I just didn't have a long rectangle that matched it to cut it out, so I had to use those little squares again. So being crafty, you know what we do, we always improvise. So I'm just going to cut 2 squares out and then just do a little trim with a pair of scissors. It works just perfectly. As you can see there, I just had to cut out that little strip. Very easy to do. And then I'm going to use these 3 dies from this Tim Holtz and Sizzix set. I'll get there. Then I decided I would also use the fern, so I'm going to use the 4. Now these, apart from the fern, these are very layered, tiny little layered dies. So I like to always cut 1 extra of each if I am using this kind of die. I do love them. I don't mind finicky work. If you don't like the finicky work, you can just cut the dies and just use the background die and paint on it. You don't have to add all the layers, but I do like all the layers, and so but I cut extra one because I usually lose a piece somewhere between my desk and my cutting station, which is 2 feet away. Then I decided to use the berries from this Christmas set. It's also by Sizzix and Tim Holtz. I wanted 2, so I cut 3. So now I'm just going to start coloring this the little bird, and I'm of course doing completely different colors from what's on the package. So I'm going to use this beautiful lime color, and it's called Twisted Citron, and then I'm combining that with the bright green of the mowed lawn for the first layer, the background layer. Then I'm going to be using squeezed lemonade and mustard seed for the yellow, the middle layer. I'm kind of creating a little yellow warbler, and then I'm going to use the mowed lawn and mustard seed. I had to think about what I was saying there for the wing. Then I do like to edge everything with the vintage photo, and so I just do the feet and legs in vintage photo, and then just a little bit around the edge. And then later on, when I glue everything together, I will also do a black with them. A small blending tool just around the very, very edge. So a little bit of water onto that yellow layer just to create some mottling. And the second layer actually has like little peepholes through it, so the underneath color shows through. So I decided to use the brown underneath that. So here's my mini blender, and this is black VersaFine Clear. I use VersaFine Clear a lot for this kind of thing, and for like when I'm wanting strong stamping and stuff like that. So that's all glued together. You can see I've put little black edges all the way around in there. Then I've kept the wing sticking up to 3D. And now I just have to repeat this process for the larger bird. I want it to look like a robin, so I'm starting with vintage photo. And I'm just putting a basic layer on. And then for the middle layer, I'm using ripe persimmon, which is the most gorgeous color. And then I'm using this rusty hinge. And then I'm going to use a combination of the vintage photo and ground espresso to create like the darker areas. And the close-up photos, you can see that all of this a little bit more clearly. And then I decided to go in with the ground espresso and do a little bit darker on the head and tail and feet. You can see how it already starts to look like a natural robin. And then the ground espresso and the rusty hinge for the wing, and a tiny little bit of the ripe persimmon. Same thing, glued it all together, a little bit of water on the top layer, and glued it all together. I just used a black fine liner to darken up the eye there. So I've got all these little bits and pieces now in place, and you'd think that I wouldn't lose, but I did. I lost a piece. So I'm using vintage photo for the background and of the mushrooms. And for the little piece that goes onto the stem of the mushroom or the stalk of the mushroom, I used the ground espresso again. So I'm just staying within a small spectrum of colors. The rusty hinge for the top of the small mushroom, with ripe persimmon for the bottom half of that mushroom, and just blend it in. Like, these blend so easily and so beautifully. It's incredible to me. And then I used the ripe persimmon for the top of the bigger mushroom and popped into the red, so I got the candied apple out. Love this color. And then I used candy apple on the bottom of the bigger mushroom of the head. So these have little holes in them, so the underneath color actually shows through when you put the top of the mushroom on. Then these are zig markers. They're just water-based markers. You can use Tombow markers, or you can do this obviously also with anything you want to. You don't have to be blending your colors like I am. You can watercolor or Tombow markers or alcohol markers or whatever you want to color your bits and pieces. So just some white highlights on the outside edge and inside the little dots on the top, and some shadowing with the zig marker, just to create some depth. And then of course I do a little bit of black all the way around the edge. I do that on all of my little die cuts today, so that they all have that little lined black outline. So I'm using the same 3 shades of green, the peel paint, the mowed lawn, and forest moss, and I'm just coloring up my leaves. I mean, I could have put these 3 colors onto the glass mat, mushed them on, added some water, turned my pieces over into them, and let something organically happen. Just that I'm doing more of a blended look today. And then of course the black, the VersaFine Clair Black Nocturne, its actual name, around all the pieces. And same with the flowers. I used the vintage photo for the background. Again, you could just paint these little pieces to look like the flowers. You don't have to do all this fiddly work if you don't like it. Or if you have a stamp, you can use a stamp and cut out. Maybe you even have a stamp that cuts out. So I used some of the red. So I'm just constructing the flowers and doing some yellows, the same 2 shades of yellow for the tiny little petals, and just letting it organically color up in the mustard seed and the squeezed lemonade. I had lost 1 piece, so just as well I cut an extra one. If you don't like gluing all these little bits and pieces together, you can do a little stamped flower if you have a stamp with a matching die cut, or you can just cut the flower out and instead of putting the pieces on, just paint the whole flower. So just paint the petals in and paint the center in. You don't have to do these little 3D layering. I personally don't mind the the layering, the fidgety work, I quite like it. I find it soothing and relaxing. So I'm going to be doing the berries now, and this color is aged mahogany. I'm doing that for the background, and then I'm using the ripe persimmon and the candied apple for the actual berries. Same technique, just smushing some color down, adding a little bit of water, and then coloring up my berries, gluing them on, and adding a few highlights. Here's my layout, and I decided I wanted some shadowing behind each window, so I'm going to use my pencil to just create the outline, and I'll do that for all three. And I'm just using two markers. These are the Zig markers. They're water-based, so they go very nicely onto this background, which is an acrylic background. So I can just use my fingers to move this color around, because the water, it just doesn't adhere to that acrylic full on. It's not a porous background. So I'll just do some shadowing, a little bit extra in the corners, and then I'll try. I didn't quite like this. I didn't feel it was strong enough, so I just went in with some more of the grey, and it's kind of a bluish grey, which works really well obviously with this background. And then it was exactly how I wanted it. So I of course had to see how this one would look, so I glued it all together. Added my little bird and the bear. By the way, I did 3D the two birds. I glued their feet on first and then put some 3D behind the top of them. So then I glued down the bigger one, but I did not glue the bottom. So I only put glue around the two edges, the two sides and the top, so that I could arrange all my little pieces coming out from underneath the frame, so they would look like they were inside that little window. And same with the little mushrooms. And then I just glued down the bottom. And of course I repeated the same process with the bird. So then I went in with this mustard seed, and I added some splatters onto the upper left, just to kind of counterbalance the yellows that were in the lower right side of the double page. And then with my signal marker, my signal pen I should call it, I just did some highlighting on the flowers. And then I just decided to do my frame on the outside. I did realize that the background needed a bit more, so I have this little sponge handy. It's from something to do with makeup, but you could use your blending tool. I'm using acrylic paint, and this is a chocolate brown acrylic paint, and I just decided I'd better protect my previous pages, so that's just me gluing in some craft mats that I had chopped up that I often use to protect my previous and next pages. And you can see that scalloped edge just picks up the scallops of the frames inside. And then this is a die set that's just all letters. It's a bigger one, and the paper is just rub-offs from when I was doing jelly printing. I just take my brayer and I rub it off on. I always have one of those manila envelopes beside me. The colors here are all the same colors as what I have on this page, so that's why I'm using this. But if you don't have jelly print paper or something like that, oh yeah, I forgot the E almost. You can just color your paper with all the different colors of distressed oxides or whatever ink you are using. So there I am arranging them so that they are in a really perfectly straight diagonal, and gluing them down. And you can see when you look at them that they really are not very bold. They don't have that kind of pop quality, but they will have when I finish. Those of you who know me know this technique very well, because I use it a lot, and that is creating the shadows around the outside of everything. So just make sure that they're very well glued down, and then I'm using a Tombow marker, and I'm using the fine liner side of it, and this is black. And then I take this N60, which is like a bluish grey, and I'm using the brush side of this to pull the black a little bit away from the edge and just shadow it out. It just blurs the solid black edge, is how I should put it. Very hard to describe, but I will show it to you in a second, and the close-up photos will show that more clearly. Then I take a fine liner black Signo marker, and I draw right up beside, close to the edge of the, as close as I can get to the edge of each letter. And then I will hold this up for you in a minute to show you the difference between the G and the R and the rest of the letters where they don't have any framing around them. So here you can see that they pop immediately with that black. So I'll just speed up this part so you don't have to watch me outlining everything one thing at a time. And even as I start lining that last letter, it's amazing how that whole word just suddenly is in its rightful place and is really harmonized with the background. That's the signal marker that I'm using there. It's just a really intense black, and it does really finish off the word beautifully. Then I decided that I wanted to put some more text in the background, so I'm just going to use the same stamp that I used before, the penny black French script stamp, and this VersaFine Clair, which is called Sea Breeze, and then the brown is called Pinecone. So you can see there I've just popped some color into the background. And now I'm just using a fine liner in white, the Signo. It's not a fine liner, sorry, it's really a Signo pen. And I'm just adding some highlights to the frame. This is like the final detail needed on my page. And with this, I call my page done. I think I will show you some close-ups and you'll be able to see the colors. Look at how bold they are, and the shadowing around the colors. And you can quite clearly see the highlighting on the frames, and also the bright color popping of the details. Look at those berries just popping against that background, and you can still see all the different layers in that background, the speckling and the different layers. So thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye.